Hey guys, tonight we step into the cold, moss-covered corridors of the Tower of London, where every brick seems soaked with the sighs of the past, and the night wind slips through as if whispering secrets you would never want to hear alone. Before you is a scene bathed in flickering firelight, a young queen preparing for the final moment of her life. Anne Boleyn, the woman who once shook the throne of England, adjusts her cloak while her ladies in waiting bow their heads, trembling lips lifting prayers they themselves do not dare believe will be answered. Not far away, a French executioner has sharpened a sword as sharp as lightning. A few years earlier, her love had been compared to the flame of an entire dynasty, a promise to rewrite the destiny of England. But the brighter the light, the denser the darkness. And trust me, if you stood right next to that throne at the fateful moment, you probably wouldn't have survived long enough to tell it again with a mocking smile. This is not only a love story, but a lament of power, betrayal, and ambition, where heart and sword beat together in one rhythm. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while listening, don't forget to leave a comment to let me know where you are and what time it is where you live. I always love seeing our map of night owls light up across the planet. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step out of the darkness of the Tower of London as if just closing a heavy door behind you. But instead of rushing straight into the waiting blade, we go backward to the dawn of a life, where everything began not with blood, but with the song of birds in the English countryside. In the green land of Kent, there was a small castle named Hever, moss-covered walls, an old tiled roof, and rows of willows reflecting on the moat. There, a little girl was born into the Boleyn family, carrying the symbol of the falcon. A creature both proud and fragile. Do you see it? In that child's eyes already flickered a strange light. Ambition, desire, and a vague belief that my time will come. People often said that Anne came from lowly origins, the kind of country girl climbing too high. But no, don't believe the stories whispered in damp taverns. Her father, Thomas Boleyn, was a diplomat, once sitting on the king's council, once sent to France and the Netherlands as an honored guest. Her mother, Elizabeth Howard, was the daughter of a duke. If there was such a thing as lowly origins, it was surely just the way enemies later wanted to tarnish a woman who once held the heart of King Henry VIII. You see, history is never just one color. The curious part, rarely mentioned, is that Anne was not an only child. Her sister, Mary Boleyn, had already found her way into Henry's arms before. There were even rumors that the king's first illegitimate son, Henry Fitzroy, might not have been the child of any other mistress, but, well, let the historians keep debating. You only need to imagine young Anne growing up in a family where love affairs with the king were as familiar as neighbors planting roses. Inside Hever Castle, there remains a relic, a prayer book filled with illustrations. If you gently turn its time-darkened pages, you will find scribbled words in French. Le temps viendra. Anne Boleyn. The time will come. I, Anne Boleyn. Historians still argue, was it a religious plea for Judgment Day, or a self-prophecy that one day she would reach the throne? Think about it. If you had once written those very words yourself, would you believe they could come true? Or simply smile at the arrogance of youth? You walk down the corridor of Hever, touching the cold wooden rail. The echo makes it feel as though Anne is still running across, silk dress flowing, eyes blazing like a child who never sits still. Later generations described her as intelligent, sharp, a little sparky, always throwing sparks. Sometimes you can imagine, if Anne lived in the 21st century, she might have been the girl who set TikTok ablaze with witty, teasing debates, charming yet disarming. But in the 16th century, being too noticeable was not always a blessing. There is an interesting detail. In some accounts, Anne was not beautiful by Tudor standards. Many called her not very pleasing to the eye. Dark hair, slightly darker skin, small build. At a court used to fair-haired girls, Anne was like a cup of black coffee placed among rows of white wine. Yet it was precisely this difference that made her remembered more than anyone else. Historians still debate, was Anne truly not beautiful, or was that just the lingering venom of indictments written after her downfall? You see, history is like a fogged mirror. Reflections glow, but are never clear. Religion, too, seeped into her blood. At that time, entire days were shaped by prayer and ritual. Imagine, instead of an alarm clock, you woke to the toll of church bells. Instead of checking email, you opened a prayer book. Anne's book, with images of the risen Christ and crowds rising from their graves, was like a puzzle of faith and apocalyptic obsession. The 16th century was an age where everyone thought the end of the world was near, and perhaps Anne believed she too would be called by name at the final hour. You step into the castle garden. There, Anne once sat listening to her father tell stories of diplomatic missions, once learned a little French, a little Latin. People said that the small girl already had a view of the world far beyond her narrow window. And indeed, not long after, Anne would be sent across the European continent, to the Netherlands, then to France, to learn and to grow amid the radiance of the most dazzling courts of the century. But before leaving, she left something at Hever that remains forever, the image of a girl who believed that fate was not about waiting, but about claiming. And you, standing here, hearing the water flowing in the moat around the castle, might also feel one thing. History does not begin with grand decisions, but with small pages, shaky handwriting, and the strange convictions of a child. Anne Boleyn had sown the seeds of destiny very early, and the gentle land of Kent could not hold this falcon. You take a deep breath, and the musty scent of stone walls mingles with the fragrance of old gardens. In that moment, you understand. If destiny is a book, Anne wrote the prologue herself, with clumsy yet haunting strokes, and the following pages, love, power, betrayal, were only the inevitable consequence of the prophecy. The time will come. You stroll into the garden where oak trees cast their shadows over a lake still as glass. People said Anne liked to wander here, sometimes gazing at her own reflection in the water. One curious detail few know. In some sketches thought to be Anne's portraits as a young girl, she often wore a cap covering all her hair, revealing only a long face and slanted eyes. Historians still debate whether that was truly Anne or simply the artistic convention of the 16th century, when women were painted more by standard than by truth. Isn't it amusing? Even the beauty of a famous queen consort remains an endless subject of debate. At Hever, beyond reading her prayer book, Anne also learned musical instruments, perhaps the lute or the clavecin. Imagine the scene. A 10-year-old girl sitting by the window, tiny fingers gliding across the strings, the sound echoing through the stone chamber. If you listen long enough, perhaps you would hear it too. Or maybe it is only the wind slipping through the cracks of the walls. But it was this training that later made Anne one of the most graceful women at the Tudor court. She could dance, sing, and present herself before a crowd. Today you might call that soft skills, and indeed, those skills became powerful weapons in the stormy court. Another curious story. Her father, Thomas Boleyn, was not only a diplomat but also a master strategist. Rumor had it he boasted about his two beautiful daughters, Mary and Anne, as if they were chess pieces on the board of power. Some condemned him, others praised him. Historians still argue, did Anne enter her relationship with King Henry VIII out of true love, or was she merely a card in her family's plan? That question, as you see, has never had a single answer. In Anne's old bedchamber, now open to visitors, hangs an aged tapestry. The castle's caretaker tells that in the late night, some tourists swear they hear the rustle of silk skirts. Some say it is Anne returning, still pacing, still waiting for the time she once wrote in her book. It sounds eerie, But it is hardly strange. The lives of tragic figures often leave an echo people today like to call ghosts. Picture this. In such a setting, Anne grew up not as a meek girl, but as a young falcon learning to stretch her wings. People said she was stubborn, sometimes even mocking those more solemn than herself. Place Anne in a modern classroom, and teachers would both struggle and adore her. The kind of student always asking difficult questions, always needing to stand out. The official point to remember: Anne was born around 1501 or perhaps 1507. Historians have never agreed. Her birth year remains one of the great mysteries. Some records suggest she was older than Henry, others claim she was only just past 20 when she caught the king's eye. This dispute is not merely about numbers, it changes how she is judged. Was Anne a young, naive girl caught in the whirlwind, or a mature woman with careful calculation? You see, a single birth year can change the entire shade of a person. In the solemn atmosphere of Hever, we realize Anne carried within her a strange mixture. On one side, devout, scribbling words of reverence to God. On the other, aware of her difference, believing she could do far more than any girl around her. It was this contradiction between faith and ambition that made her so compelling. No one could ignore her. Now you gently close your eyes. The water lapping at the moat feels like a heartbeat, steady yet carrying an echo from afar. You almost see the shadow of a little girl running, clutching her prayer book, whispering strange words. The time will come. And indeed, the time would come. Only no one imagined it would bring both glory and death. You gently leave the walls of Hever Castle, where Anne's childhood had sown the seeds of a fierce destiny. The damp path before you opens toward the north, where the throne of England glows with golden splendor. There, a young man has just ascended, not yet the obese tyrant remembered by history, but a prince radiant like the morning sun. Imagine Henry VIII when he first took the crown, taller than 6 feet in a world where the average man stood only around 5'7". Hair golden as honey, eyes bright blue, a strong and athletic build. If social media had existed, Henry would have been the royal heartthrob, gathering millions of followers with just one smile. Not only handsome, he excelled at sports, horseback riding, hunting, jousting. Foreign diplomats wrote of him with admiration mixed with envy. A young king both gifted and magnetic. A curious detail few know: Henry was also passionate about tennis, a luxury game of the time. Records tell that watching him play was like witnessing music in motion, every move both graceful and powerful. Imagine a king praised as the most beautiful sight in tennis. It sounds modern, almost amusing. Historians still debate Henry's true nature in youth. Some say he was gentle, kind-hearted, called by Erasmus the amiable prince. Others suspect it was only a mask, that inside already lay seeds of arrogance and absolute hunger for power. You see, even the Golden Prince was already a mirror with 2 sides, one of light and one of shadow waiting to rise. Follow your steps into a Tudor palace, the scent of pine wood burning in the fireplace, the heavy aroma of wine, the sound of a lute playing in the corner of the hall. There sits young Henry, surrounded by courtiers, yet instead of discussing state affairs, he delights in conversation, in music, in poetry. People said he could sing like a professional, and often composed songs of love. Imagine Henry in the 21st century. Perhaps he would release a pop album and appear on reality shows before ever thinking of ruling a nation. But the throne was no stage for music. Henry did not ascend as the elder son, but because his brother Arthur died at 15. This is official history. Henry became heir only by an unexpected death, and then by law he married Arthur's widow, Catherine of Aragon, Princess of Spain. Their wedding came with a joint coronation, a union of love and politics. You realize young Henry truly loved Catherine. She was older, gentle, educated, beloved by the people. They lived happily in those first years, often seen together as the model royal couple. But shadows crept in, failed pregnancies, one after another, miscarriages, infants dead at birth. Henry once held a newborn son who lived only 52 days. From then, obsession began to grow. Historians argue, did Henry truly love Catherine? Or was it only a bond painted by politics? For in more than 20 years of marriage, apart from Princess Mary who survived, there was no male heir. To a medieval king, that was not a private sorrow, but a national nightmare. Put yourself in Henry's place. At every feast, every ceremony, the eyes of the court pierced like daggers. Where is the king's son? Where is the prince? In Henry's mind echoed scripture, "Thou shalt not take thy brother's wife. He who does so shall have no children." He believed God was punishing him for marrying Arthur's widow. Today, you might call it blaming fate, but in that age, they believed it. Henry began to change. From a laughing prince, he turned into a man filled with worry. He still sang, still rode, still triumphed in tournaments, yet behind the dazzling smile was a fear unspoken. Do you hear it? In the pounding hooves of his horse lay the restless heartbeat of an entire kingdom. Outside, the king. One detail rarely mentioned. Henry had an illegitimate son, Henry Fitzroy, with a young noblewoman. The boy survived and was even granted titles, but law forbade Fitzroy from inheriting the crown. To Henry, this was proof that the fault was not his. He could father sons, only Catherine could not give him one. Bitter irony, isn't it? An illegitimate child as evidence of a king's virility. Meanwhile, Catherine aged, her health declining, and Henry's unease deepened. Historians still wonder, if Catherine had borne him sons, would Henry ever have looked toward Anne Boleyn? Perhaps the whole history of England would have turned another way. But history does not speak the word if. Imagine young Henry as the leading actor in a grand play, every eye upon him, awaiting his move. Yet instead of a written script, fate handed him a blank page, how to secure the throne. In that crisis, he began to seek new light, and into that space stepped Anne Boleyn, a forbidden flame. Close your eyes now and picture Henry, not the corpulent king of later portraits, but the golden-haired youth, bright-eyed, riding across open fields, cloak billowing in the wind. You hear the cheers of the crowd, the sweat of horses mingling with the fragrance of wildflowers. It was the height of Tudor glory, and the moment when darkness began to lurk. Henry VIII, the Golden Prince, was a picture split in two, radiant as the morning sun, yet within that light already hid the coming night. And, you know well, it would not be long before the moon of Anne Boleyn rose, pulling tides that would transform a kingdom. Close your eyes and let imagination guide you. We leave Hever Castle, cross the green fields, sail across the English Channel with its rolling waves, and arrive at another land, where Anne Boleyn is no longer just a little girl of a noble family, but slowly becoming a new woman, carrying the spirit and breath of all youth. Before your eyes rise the granite castles of the Loire Valley, Blois, Amboise, even the palace of Fontainebleau. Ivory walls, spires reaching for the sky. Here the court of King Francois I sparkles with brilliance, bursting with an energy that Hever Castle could never match. And in that light stands a dark-haired young woman with bright eyes, slight in figure yet full of presence. Anne Boleyn. Her duty was to serve as lady-in-waiting to Queen Claude, wife of Francois I. A queen not dazzling as in paintings, but the embodiment of faith and devotion. Claude bore 7 children in 8 years, 3 of whom survived as princes. Imagine it. Each year the palace echoed with a newborn's cry, like the drumbeat of triumph. For a young girl watching from behind the curtain, this was more than family life. It was a lesson in power. The throne depended on the womb of a woman. and aged 18 months, and carried this lesson back to England as an unshakable truth. But the French court was not only a factory for princes. It was the center of culture, art, and intellect. King Francois I was a patron of poets, musicians, and especially Leonardo da Vinci. Yes, Leonardo, the Italian genius, lived his final years in France, only a short distance from Anne. Historians still debate, did Anne ever meet Leonardo? There is no proof, but imagine. One afternoon in a stone-paved garden, a young girl walks by, and an old man with a silver beard lifts his eyes. Just that fleeting moment is enough for imagination to soar. A young maiden and a genius, two worlds brushing against each other in the brilliance of the Renaissance. Here, Anne learned more than how to curtsy or carry a tray. She learned music, dance, singing, and most of all, speech. They said Anne spoke French as fluently as a native. On rare occasions, she even served as interpreter for English envoys. Picture it, a young woman standing between powerful men, translating sharp words of diplomacy. In a world where women were often background, that moment was like Anne standing at the center of a chessboard, with both sides forced to look at her. That was no ordinary thing. It was the sign of a star being born. Curiously, Anne was never described as a great beauty. Many said her sister Mary was fairer. Anne had darker skin, small stature, but Anne had charisma, an aura that captured souls. People might forget her face, but never her eyes, nor the sly curve of her smile. Place her in the 21st century and you would call it aura, that thing which makes every head turn when someone enters the room. The French court also taught Anne a peculiar game, courtly love. Love in the style of knights. It was half real, half theater. A man praising, writing poems, offering gifts, while the lady answered with a glance or a teasing phrase. This was not only entertainment, but political weaponry. Glances, gestures, sweet words, all could build alliances or undo enemies. Anne learned this game quickly, mastering it so well that later even King Henry VIII would become prey. Historians still argue, did Anne truly learn the art of seduction in France? Some insist she was shaped in a world of passion, becoming a mistress of manipulation. Recent studies disagree. The household of Queen Claude was pious, not a den of intrigue. The truth lies somewhere between. Anne was devout yet sharp, absorbing culture deeply. She did not need to sleep with men to learn charm. It was the fusion of intellect and presence that made her a phenomenon. Imagine a ball at Amboise Castle, candles flickering, music swelling, guests dancing. Anne stands there, not in the center, yet every gaze touches her. She wears no lavish jewels, no extravagant gown, yet her posture is different, confidence forged by nearly a decade in Europe. And in that moment, a whisper rose within her. I was not born to stand behind. I was born to step into the light. When Anne returned to England, she carried all this with her. People looked at her and saw Paris embodied, graceful, refined, and faintly dangerous. In the Tudor court, she stood out like a flame in a dark room, and Henry VIII, the Golden Prince now haunted by his throne, would not resist her. If you close your eyes, you can see this image. Anne by a French palace window, candlelight flickering behind, the night stretching ahead. She did not yet know that in a few years her eyes would meet those of the King of England. But you know, and that is what makes this moment haunting. For from that instant, the French mirror Anne carried would reflect straight into Henry's heart, shaking an entire kingdom. And this was the French mirror, the chapter of Anne's life where she learned not only how to live, but how to shine. A chapter of music, of light, yet also one that sowed the seeds of an irreversible tragedy. Sit down, let your breath slow, and let imagination slip into the world of the 1520s. The wind is soft as a lullaby. Footsteps echo faintly on ancient stone. You are in Hampton Court, where candlelight flickers on patterned tapestries and the scent of burning wood drifts through the vast hall. A space once filled with feasts, with hunting tales, with music echoing from grand dances. But tonight, among old melodies, a new gaze has appeared. One that will upend an entire kingdom. Anne Boleyn has returned from France, no longer the little girl of Hever Castle, no longer the shadow behind her sister Mary. She enters the Tudor court like a fresh wind, carrying the elegance of France. Graceful posture, fluent voice, a half-hidden smile. People whisper, "That is not an ordinary English girl. She carries a foreign aura." Men admired, women grew wary, and among all the gazes, one pair of blue eyes lingered longer than all the rest. The eyes of Henry VIII. Henry was still the radiant king. Tall, strong, bright-eyed, golden-haired by worry. He was used to admiration, used to being called the finest athlete, the best singer, the most skillful rider in Europe. But when he looked at Anne, he saw something different. Not submission, not adoration, but a gaze straight back, at once defiant and promising. For the most powerful man in the kingdom, it was addictive. The drama deepens because Henry at that very moment was entangled with Mary Boleyn, Anne's sister. Mary was considered the king's mistress, a short affair but enough to cause whispers. Some murmured she might even have borne one of Henry's illegitimate children, though history never confirmed it. And then came Anne, with confidence, elegance, unlike her sister. Not eager, not easy, but reserved like a closed bud that made one long to see it bloom. Henry began to court her, sweet words at first, then watchful eyes at dances. But Anne was not easy prey. She did not fall into his arms like others. She held her distance, bowed properly, replied politely, then withdrew. That restraint fed Henry's obsession. He was used to instant obedience, but Anne knew how to stop just in time to leave him craving more. And from that moment, the game began. Henry started writing letters, not decrees, not orders, but love letters. Many survive to this day, rare proof of a king's private soul. He called Anne sweetheart, mistress, the one and only. He sketched hearts, wrote H and A entwined, like a schoolboy dreaming. In some, he begged he could not sleep without her. In others, he swore eternal devotion, body and soul. Imagine, a king who could command any woman, now trembling with pen in hand, pleading for the attention of one girl. And read them at Hever Castle. None of her replies survive. History leaves that silence unfilled. And in that silence, centuries of debate grew. Some say Anne played hard to get, holding herself back to raise her value. Others say she was simply afraid to love a married man. A king was to walk on dangerous ground. Whatever the truth, the result was the same. Henry sank deeper into the fire. Not only letters, Henry gave gifts, among them the strangest. A tiny golden whistle, but inside it an ear spoon and a toothpick. Strange, even comical, yet its meaning clear. Blow, and I will come. Practical, symbolic. You may laugh at its awkwardness, yet admit it was unique, born of a king's heart drunk with love. This affair was no longer private. Everyone saw Henry's passion for Anne. They whispered in corridors, at banquets, in the marketplace. Catherine of Aragon, the true queen, still appeared at Henry's side, still lifted her head as a symbol of loyalty. But behind her stern smile, surely she knew another shadow was intruding. It was not only betrayal of love, but a threat to politics. Catherine was a Spanish princess, daughter of Queen Isabella. Her marriage the bond between England and Catholic Spain. To challenge Catherine was to challenge all of Europe. But Henry no longer cared. He did not want Anne as mistress. He wanted her as wife. And that was madness. For to marry Anne, Henry had to do what no English king had ever done: divorce his queen. Historians still argue, did Henry truly love Anne so deeply, or was he driven only by obsession for a son, believing Anne could give him one? Yet read the letters, see the gifts, hear the whispered words still preserved, and it is hard to deny the passion. It was love, obsession, addiction. The court grew tense. Factions split. Some stood with Queen Catherine, others bent toward the king. And in all the turmoil, Anne remained, silent yet blazing. Not a mistress, not yet a wife, but the focus of every eye. At each banquet, Henry's gaze lit when Anne entered. He followed her when she danced, when she laughed, when she spoke with others. One record says Henry looked at her with such devotion that the whole room pretended not to notice. All knew, none dared speak. Rumors spread. Anne would be the next queen. Some whispered she is too bold. Others murmured, perhaps it is destiny, and Catherine, with all her faith, must have prayed many nights in tears. Henry did not step back. He moved forward. He asked how to end the marriage to Catherine, how to wed Anne, and thus arose the great matter, the great question of England. That moment was the peak of this chapter. From trembling letters, from a strange gift, from glances across a hall, a forbidden love had become a fire consuming every barrier. No longer harmless courtly play, no longer a short tryst like with Mary. This was a forbidden flame, fierce enough to burn the throne, the dynasty, and Anne herself, who lit it. Do you see? Love can be a beautiful fire, but when it burns where it should not, it becomes the most dangerous. And if you had been there in Hampton Court that year, with music swelling and Henry's eyes locked on Anne, you would know the kingdom was about to change forever. And perhaps you too would whisper, I dare not stand too close. This fire will consume all. Stay a little longer. Let your mind drift as if listening to a melody repeating, and we continue to float along with the story of the forbidden flame. Candlelight in the study of Hampton Court flickers on the face of Henry, bent over a wooden desk. Before him is not a state paper, but a thin sheet of parchment. He holds the quill, ink dripping into lines, and he begins to write. Mine own sweetheart. The first words, so tender it is hard to believe they came from a king. He confesses that since the day apart, time drags like a century. He admits that each night in bed he longs to hold her in his arms, kiss her neck, touch her breast. You hear it and feel as if peeking into the private diary of a ruler. Awkward, fierce, all too human. In another letter, Henry signs with a heart. Inside, he writes the letters H and A entwined. A boy of 17 might do this, but here it is the king of a nation. If Instagram had existed, perhaps he would have posted the doodled heart, tagged Anne and written, "Forever yours." But instead of social media, he had only letters, carried by servants across long roads to Hever Castle, where Anne waited. Anne read them, and we can only guess. Did she smile faintly? Did her hands tremble? Or did she calculate in silence? For her replies are gone, perhaps burned, perhaps hidden. This silence has fueled centuries of debate. Some say Anne kept her distance deliberately, turning herself into a treasure too rare to touch. Others say she loved too, but knew she must be careful. What do you think? If you were Anne, how would you answer when a king begged to be in your arms? At court banquets, Henry began to show his affection openly. He watched Anne when she danced, when she laughed, his eyes no longer concealed, forcing the whole room to pretend not to notice. Whispers spread. The king is besotted. Gossip flared like fire in dry grass. And the hotter it spread, the stronger the blaze. Catherine of Aragon, the true queen, still sat on the throne, still smiled with dignity, still attended solemn ceremonies. Yet surely she felt the undercurrent rise. She was no longer young, no longer able to bear children, and she knew Henry sought what she could not give. Perhaps night after night Catherine prayed, hands trembling, eyes wet with tears. But her prayers could not extinguish the flame kindled by Henry's gaze at Anne. The strange thing was that Anne refused to become another Mary. She would not be a mistress. She kept herself. She refused, and in doing so she became the ultimate challenge. Henry was all the more consumed. For a man accustomed to obedience, the one thing that tormented him was someone who dared to say no. That was Anne's way of holding Henry without ever touching him. The court divided. Some smiled, thinking it was only a fleeting infatuation. Others saw further, the seeds of crisis. For if Henry wanted Anne as wife, he must put Catherine aside. And that was not only a household matter, but the matter of a realm. The Pope, Spain, all Catholic Europe, all would be drawn in. But Henry no longer listened. He was obsessed, and the obsession deepened. Picture one winter night, Anne sits in her chamber at Hever, turning the pages of her prayer book, her eyes pausing on the words, "The time will come, I, Anne Boleyn." She smiles faintly. Did she glimpse her fate? Or was it only youthful illusion? Outside, the wind rattles the shutters, leaves scrape the stone wall, and elsewhere, Henry bends over parchment, ink blotting, heart pounding like a young man first in love. Later generations called it the forbidden flame. Beautiful, bright, warm, yet it consumed everything. Stand too near and you would feel the heat on your face, forcing you back. But Henry and Anne did not retreat. They stepped into the fire, hand in hand, or at least eye to eye. Accepting that ahead lay the abyss, it still listened to the breath of the Tudor palace drifting like murmuring winds. The forbidden flame has burst forth, and now it is no longer just love. It has become a great issue, a great matter. The crisis that would shake all of Europe. Henry VIII was no longer satisfied with awkward letters or strange gifts. He loved Anne Boleyn so deeply that he decided she would not be a mistress, she would be queen. But to make that happen, he had to do the unthinkable. Dissolve his marriage of more than 20 years with Catherine of Aragon. And that was the moment love became weapon, storm, and challenge to the Pope himself. Picture a winter morning, dim light falling on Westminster, Henry pacing in his study, cloak sweeping the stone floor. He told his courtiers his marriage was sinful, that God was punishing him for marrying his brother's widow. He quoted the Bible, his voice ringing like judgment. "Thou shalt not take thy brother's wife. He who does so shall have no children." He truly believed, or at least he needed to believe, that God opposed him. And that belief became his sharpest weapon. Historians still argue, did Henry truly believe this theology, or did he use scripture as an excuse to marry Anne? Some say he was tormented by faith. Others insist it was theater, crafted to sanctify personal desire. The truth likely lies between. Henry believed what he wanted to believe, and belief served ambition. The court trembled. Catherine refused, declaring firmly that her marriage was lawful, that she had never known Arthur, Henry's brother, during her brief union with him. She stood tall, eyes proud, telling Henry before the court that she was his lawful wife. Imagine it, a woman alone, facing the most powerful king, yet unafraid. That was the moment Catherine became a symbol of loyalty and faith, even as she saw her crown slipping away. Henry appealed to the Pope. He wanted annulment, but the matter was tangled. The Pope was a virtual prisoner of Spanish troops, commanded by none other than Catherine's nephew, Emperor Charles V. Imagine, how could the Pope grant annulment that would disgrace the aunt of the most powerful ruler in Europe? Henry was trapped. Picture the waiting. Year after year, Henry sent requests, summoned theologians to argue his case. The Pope delayed, refused, evaded. All the while, Anne remained by Henry's side, steady, silent. like a flame smoldering in his heart. 7 years. 7 years of waiting. A love long enough to exhaust any soul, yet Henry would not relent. Strangely, during this time, Henry read a small book by William Tyndale, The Obedience of a Christian Man. Within it was a line Anne herself is said to have placed before him. The king is the supreme judge, and above the king stands no one but God. When Henry read it, he exclaimed, "This is the book for me, and for all kings." Do you hear it? The thunder of revolution. From a man begging the Pope, Henry suddenly realized, why beg? I am the one who decides. From that moment, Henry began to sever ties. Rome was no longer supreme. He looked instead to himself, and so the seed of the Church of England was planted. Historians still ask, did Anne push Henry into this, or had he long been ready? Some say she was the spark for religious rupture. Others argue Henry merely used love as pretext for a power he already sought. But one truth is clear. Without Anne, the great matter would not have exploded as it did. During those years of waiting, Henry and Anne even traveled to Calais to meet Francois I of France, seeking support. And when they returned, records suggest they at last became lovers, a union irreversible. Picture that night, in a quiet chamber, Henry whispering he would forsake the world for her. Anne, perhaps trembling, perhaps proud, answering she would give him what he most craved, a son. 2 promises spoken, weaving together like a red thread, and England and Europe would pay the price for those words. From then, Henry acted. He pressed Parliament to back him, passing laws declaring the king the supreme head of the Church of England. Chain by chain, Rome was broken away. The king no longer begged the Pope, he granted himself annulment. Catherine was set aside, and Anne was raised to the throne. Do you hear the pounding drums? It is the heartbeat of a kingdom transforming. Henry and Anne had not only rewritten a love story, they rewrote the history of England, turning a Catholic realm into one standing apart, the source of bloody upheaval to come. And all began with love, with a heart scrawled H and A, with a girl who dared say no to a king, with a small book whispering, "The king is supreme." Do you see? The so-called great matter was not only politics. It was proof that one heart in reckless love could upend the order of the world. And when you think of Catherine, standing in her chapel, praying through tears to save her marriage, you see the tragedy was not only hers, it was the tragedy of an age. If you had stood in England then, you would have felt it. Heavy air, churches murmuring, court divided, people anxious. A kingdom at the threshold of a door, and behind it, both darkness and light, inseparable. And when Anne laid her hand on the throne, she knew the prophecy, "The time will come," had come true. But she also knew every step henceforth would be upon the edge of a blade. You are right. To leap straight from the great matter to the shadow of the tower would be like skipping a sharp bend in the road. Between the break with the Pope and that fateful morning at the Tower of London, there was still a span of life, bright at first, then darkening. For Anne, a chapter that must be told, so you can feel her heartbeat quicken day by day, and with it, the heartbeat of the whole kingdom. We can call it the Crown of Fire. Close your eyes and picture a morning in 1533. Whitehall Palace glows with light, walls draped in crimson velvet, and in a discreet ceremony, Henry and Anne are made husband and wife. The marriage, secret and almost defiant of tradition, was quiet yet earth-shaking. A few months later, Anne was crowned queen in Westminster Abbey. Trumpets blared, processions filled the streets, people threw flowers. It was her summit. From a country girl, Anne now wore the crown, wife of the most powerful king in England. Yet even amid the cheers, there was a chill. Not all the people rejoiced. To many Catholics, Anne was the destroyer, the witch who stole the queen's husband. In taverns and marketplaces, curses mingled with drums of celebration. A crown of fire, dazzling but scorching, ready to burn its bearer. Anne conceived soon after the wedding. Henry was certain it would be a prince, and he rejoiced wildly. He held feasts, hung banners, even wrote verse of praise. Then, in September 1533, Anne gave birth. The child was a girl. Do you hear the sigh? Henry forced a smile, named her Elizabeth, yet inside he was disappointed. He wanted an Edward, a new Arthur, not an Elizabeth. Anne must have cradled her baby, gazing into those wide eyes, knowing this child was destiny. She could not know Elizabeth would become a legendary queen, but in that moment she knew one thing. Her own place was fragile. To secure it, she must bear a son. That pressure lay heavy as stone upon her chest. The next pregnancies brought no joy. One miscarriage, one stillbirth. Henry at first consoled her, then grew impatient. The flame in his eyes cooled into frost. And at court, her enemies, Catholic nobles loyal to Catherine, jealous courtiers, began to whisper. In this time a strange rumor spread that Anne had 6 fingers on one hand. No proof, yet the tale spread fast, enemies using it to paint her as a witch. Do you see? When a woman steps too far beyond her bounds, the world makes her a monster. Modern historians reject it as slander, yet the shadow of that rumor clung to Anne forever. Meanwhile, Henry turned his eyes to Jane Seymour, a gentle lady in waiting, unlike Anne. If Anne was fire, Jane was water, quiet, soft, yielding. Henry was drawn, and Anne saw the danger. She grew jealous, she raged, she confronted, and in Henry's eyes that fury made her less alluring. Tension mounted, factions formed, rumors spread. Anne accused of adultery, treason, even incest. No one knew truth, but truth no longer mattered. The flame that once lit her path now became the torch that burned its bearer. Do you feel the pounding? It is the sound of a crown cracking. Anne, who once rose to the summit, who once wore the crown, who once held Henry's heart. Now, with each step in the palace, her footfall echoed like a funeral drum, and the shadow of the Tower of London, the cold fortress for the fallen, crept closer, long and dark as nightfall. Close your eyes and you see Anne, alone in her chamber, holding little Elizabeth, whispering lullabies through trembling lips. She knew this child was everything, the only reason to hope. But beyond the door, the court was playing another game, and in that game, Anne was no longer the proud queen, but a pawn awaiting sacrifice. Take a slow breath, close your eyes and feel as though you are sitting on an old wooden chair inside the damp stone chamber of the Tower of London. The cold scent of morning mist, the rusty tang of iron bars, all weave together into a curtain of tension. And in that space appears a figure. Anne Boleyn, the woman who once entered court like a flame, now standing before her fate as a prisoner. The May morning is shrouded in gray. Above, the sky hangs thick with clouds, like a funeral shroud already spread. The footsteps of guards echo steadily on the stone, marking the final hours of a queen who once blazed bright. Anne sits in her cell, head lifted slightly, her eyes no less radiant than when she graced a dance. They say she did not weep. She spoke with her ladies, sometimes even smiled, but who can know? When night fell, whether she trembled in solitude, clutching herself, thinking of little Elizabeth asleep somewhere, whispering, "My child, forgive me." The charges against her netted thick as a trap. Adultery, treason, even incest with her brother George. Evidence, nothing but rumor, jealousy, and calculation. Whispers said Thomas Cromwell, Henry's right hand, orchestrated it all to sweep Anne aside and clear the way for Jane Seymour. Scholars still debate, was Anne guilty of anything at all? But in the Tudor court, truth mattered less than preserving the crown, and in that game, Anne was a piece to be sacrificed. The trial was staged, all ceremony, no justice. Anne stood before the nobles, head held high, her voice ringing clear. "I am innocent." A recorder wrote that her gaze was so bright the room fell silent. But the verdict was sealed before she entered. They read the sentence of death, and in that moment, Anne shed no tear. She only smiled faintly, as if she had long known destiny's decree. By then, Henry was a stranger. He was no longer the man who had scrawled love letters, who once swore body and soul to her. He was cold as iron, eager even to wed Jane Seymour. It was whispered he became betrothed the very day Anne was executed, a cruelty so stark that even the loyal sighed. Morning, May 19th, 1536. The Tower of London stood hushed. Crowds pressed outside, whispering, some weeping, some cursing. Anne walked out, dressed in gray gown, crimson cloak, a simple hood. She prayed, then walked straight to the scaffold. Henry had hired an executioner from Calais, famed for the sword, not the axe, to make the end swift. A strange mercy, compassion wrapped in cold steel. Anne stood tall, looked around, her voice steady. She declared she prayed for the king, that she bore no malice, that she commended her soul to God. Perhaps it was faith, perhaps strategy, but surely it was pride to the last. The executioner bowed, asked forgiveness. Anne nodded. Then she knelt, placing her head upon the block. The world held its breath. The executioner called out, a feint to distract, and as Anne turned instinctively, the sword fell. Quick, clean, final, her head dropped, and silence cloaked the air. News spread across the realm. Some rejoiced, some mourned, but all understood this was not merely the death of one woman. It was Henry VIII declaring that he could raise one from nothing to queen and destroy her in an instant. Elizabeth, Anne's daughter, was just 3 years old. The child knew nothing, only that her mother would never return. Yet, that same girl would one day be Queen Elizabeth I, who would lead England into a golden age. The bitterest irony, the woman condemned for failing to bear a son gave birth to the greatest queen the realm ever knew. Later generations still argue, was Anne a seductress or victim of politics? Ambitious destroyer of herself or emblem of courage? Likely she was all. Too complex to fit a single mold, too intelligent, too strong, too extraordinary for a man's world, and therefore unable to survive it. Wit. If one day you walk into the Tower of London, cross the old yard, pause, close your eyes, and you may hear the wind whisper, "The time will come, I, Anne Boleyn." That time came, radiant, tragic, and echoing forever in the stone walls. You hear the wind outside the narrow stone window of the Tower of London still murmuring, as if what happened on that ground refuses to fade. Anne's head had fallen, but the story was not finished, for the death of a queen did not end one life only. It unleashed aftershocks through the court, into the streets, and into the heart of all England. News spread like fire racing through dry grass. In the palace, courtiers exchanged glances. Some sighed in relief, others shivered quietly. They knew in a kingdom where love could turn into a death sentence overnight, no one was truly safe. Yesterday, Anne Boleyn was queen, lawful wife of the king. Today, she was a name erased from the record. Who could be sure they would not share her fate tomorrow? In the streets, the reaction was divided. Some rejoiced, believing Catherine of Aragon, the queen cast aside, had been avenged in her grave. Some wept silently, mourning a woman who once dared to stand tall before power. And others whispered strange tales, that Anne's blood still stained the ground, and on moonlit nights her shadow walked across it, hair flying, eyes fixed on those who betrayed her. Henry, meanwhile, seemed untouched. The next day, he left London to prepare for his wedding to Jane Seymour. The swiftness chilled all who watched. The man who once doodled hearts of H&A now signed the contract for a new marriage, as if the old love had never existed. It was not only cruelty, it was a message. The crown never waits. Jane Seymour became the new queen, humble, gentle, the very opposite of Anne. People called Jane the water that soothed the flame, but beneath that calm light, Anne's shadow had not vanished. With each step Jane took, she must have felt she was walking upon the ashes of her predecessor. In the monasteries, Catholic priests whispered this was God's vengeance. A queen who defied the Pope, who shook the church, had been punished. But in other corners, craftsmen and market women quietly told stories of Anne as a symbol. Some even kept coins bearing her image, though forbidden, as secret relics of a brief time when a woman dared to stand beside a king. Thomas Cromwell, the man believed to have engineered the plot, walked the palace with cold face. Yet he too knew that one day the same sword that struck Anne might fall upon him. In Henry's game, no one was untouchable. And there was Elizabeth, the little girl of 3, red-haired, bright-eyed, grew up in the shadow of her mother's execution. To the court, she was only a daughter, not worth expectation. But close your eyes and see her. Elizabeth in a chamber, holding a wooden doll, gaze sorrowful yet strangely resolute. She could not understand, yet unconsciously absorbed what her mother left behind: intelligence, pride, and the dark shadow of the tower. The world thought Anne vanished with her severed head, but her shadow lingered in every whisper, every dream, every cautious glance when passing the scaffold yard. A flame without form, but with embers still hot. If you stand still in that yard of the tower on a windless evening, you may hear a whisper lingering in the air. Not guard, not tourist, but the voice of a woman, soft as wind, proud as steel. The time will come. And when you shiver at those words, you understand. The end was never the end. It was only the prelude to a legacy that would haunt England for centuries. You may think the sword ended everything, but if you listen longer, you realize that silence was not the end. It was the beginning of a long aftershock. The death of Anne Boleyn did not just kill a woman. It opened a void of power, a fracture in politics, and an invisible trail of blood spreading across Europe. In the court, Anne's absence was filled by the quiet, gentle figure of Jane Seymour. Yet everyone knew Jane existed only because she walked upon the ashes of her predecessor. Each step she took in velvet halls seemed to echo the rustle of Anne's silk, the woman who once brought the church to its knees. Henry rejoiced in new waters, but beneath his joy, Anne's shadow pressed heavy. Among the people, division had never been sharper. Some exulted, God has punished the witch. Others whispered in taverns, the true queen has been murdered. And in distant villages where peasants rarely heard court music, Anne's story was woven into legend. Some said she had 6 fingers, a mark of the devil. Others swore she was saintly, innocent, who died blessing her husband. Truth was torn apart, scattered like seeds from which a forest of rumors grew. Religion itself cracked. The break with Rome could not be undone. The Catholic Church cursed, naming Henry and Anne as sinners. But Anne was dead, and people suddenly realized the Reformation was no longer bound to one woman. It had become reality. Monasteries dissolved, church wealth seized by the crown. The people gasped, 1,000 years of faith shaken by a flame of love. And though Anne was gone, reform surged on like a flood through a broken dam. Elizabeth, the 3-year-old child, grew in that shadow. Daughter of a beheaded queen, scorned, struck from the line of succession. Yet the memory of her mother did not fade. Sometimes she was seen sitting quietly by a window, eyes distant as if hearing a voice from the past. Perhaps, deep within, she already heard Anne's whisper, "The time will come." And Cromwell, the architect of the trial, strode through the palace with a cold face. He thought himself victorious, but he did not know that a few years later, Henry would turn on him as well. In the Tudor court, all were pawns. Today you lift the king, tomorrow the king casts you down. Anne learned this in blood. Cromwell would learn it with his head. If you walked the streets of London, then you would see satirical prints pasted on walls. A long-haired woman dragged to hell, demons rejoicing at her feet. But step further into the shadow of an inn, and you might hear another tale whispered, of a queen courageous enough to defy the Pope, to love and to die unbowed. That contradiction kept Anne alive, not in flesh, but in the image that split hearts. And if you stood at the Tower of London on a stormy night, you might hear the wind howl through the stone cracks, carrying the echo of two clashing truths, and the witch and the saint. In that silence you understand, death did not extinguish the story. It only carried it farther, like an echo bouncing from stone walls deep into the dark. Relax, let the whisper in the wind carry us farther, beyond the thick walls of the Tower of London. Anne's head had fallen, but her shadow did not vanish. It moved through velvet halls, slipped between the pages of history, drifting toward the future, where a red-hamed girl, Elizabeth, was growing up amid light and shadow. The world may forget hundreds of nobles, may forget those who once sat in judgment, but it never forgets Anne. To enemies, she was the witch who broke a family, the woman who made a kingdom abandon Rome. To those who sympathized, she was the emblem of intelligence, of pride, of a woman daring to challenge the rules of men. These two images lived side by side, neither erasing the other, like two faces of a coin spinning forever in the hand of history. Elizabeth grew beneath the weight of her mother's shadow. The girl had been scorned, struck from the line of succession, called a bastard. Yet as she grew, Elizabeth resembled Anne more, sharp, clever, eyes ablaze. In her heart, perhaps she carried a silent memory of the mother she lost, and an unspoken vow that one day she would prove her worth. When Elizabeth took the throne in 1558, all Europe understood. The seed Anne planted had sprouted. The woman executed for failing to bear a son had given England a queen who would bring a golden age. Scholars still argue, what was Anne's true legacy? Some say it was religious reform, the break with Rome. Some say it was Elizabeth, the golden age. Others claim Anne's legacy lies in her very story, proof that a woman, though crushed by law, could still touch power, and that the price was blood. Today, if you walk into the Tower of London, across the yard where she knelt, you will see silent stones, but if you listen closely, you may sense another sound. Not the strike of a blade, but a whisper. The time will come. That time came not only for Anne, but for Elizabeth, for a kingdom itself. And when night falls, when you sit in a darkened room, hearing the faint hum of a fan, Anne Boleyn's story continues, like a candle burning that will not go out. A love turned tragedy, a sacrifice turned legacy, and a reminder that power always carries the most brutal cost. You exhale, smile faintly in the dark, and understand that Anne never truly vanished. She remains, in every gust of wind through the tower, in Elizabeth's eyes at her coronation, and in the heartbeat of night owls like you listening to this story. Do you hear it? The wind at the Tower of London seems never to fall silent. It still carries the echo of a woman who rose to glory and fell beneath the sword. Yet as you have seen, Anne Boleyn's story did not close in blood. It opened in legacy, in Elizabeth's eyes, in the golden age, in the very pages of history we still whisper about tonight. If you are still awake at this hour, perhaps you feel as I do, History never truly sleeps. It seeps into every dream, every gust of wind, every story we retell to one another in the late night. And if tonight's journey felt worthwhile, leave me a small trace. A like, a subscribe, only if you truly enjoy the way I tell it. Comment to let me know where you are listening from, and what time it is where you live. I always love to see our map of night owls glowing across the world. Now, turn off the lights, close your eyes, and let the whisper of the past carry you into sleep.